Welcome, everyone. We are really glad to have you here. I'm Claire from the Onboarding Lab, which is a free weekly newsletter that helps you increase customer lifetime value through the art of customer onboarding. And this chat today is co-hosted by OnRamp, the team providing the platform intentionally designed to scale customer onboarding. So I'm really excited to introduce our amazing panelists today. So I'm going to hand over to Frank first, our co-host, so you can introduce yourself, and then we'll just do a quick round of everyone else just for some intros. Go ahead, Fred.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm Frank Auger. I've made a career out of customer success. Most notably, I was on the leadership team at HubSpot for 10 years and built their post-sales processes there. And now I run customer success in all the post-sales functions here at OnRamp. I'm really excited to be with my colleagues on this webinar today.
Amazing. Michael, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Boyd. I like to joke I've been in customer success forever. I just didn't know it. So 25 years of leading post-sales teams. First half of my career was all professional services, the last half all in customer success. And today I currently help advise and get other companies up on their customer success strategy and what do they need to do to keep growing.
Fantastic. Bob, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Bob Mathers. I'm a speaker and customer success coach. I work with companies typically trying to get from 100 or 10 million to 100 million, but I also work with a lot of local incubators in the startup community, helping leaders find their first 10 customers, grow that to 10, grow that to 100. So really work with companies all along the entire spectrum. And I'm super excited to talk about onboarding today.
Cool. And finally, Kat.
Right there with you, Bob. Super excited here too. So I'm Kat Durant. I'm the manager of our onboarding services at company Integrate. I started from the bottom. I was an onboarding specialist doing the teaching and the trainings myself. And now I manage a team where we onboard all sorts of products. I do fulfill a player coach role. So yeah, excited to dive in.
Amazing. So we've got a really good, diverse group of people here, which hopefully is going to lead to some interesting conversations. So just as a reminder to everyone attending, there is a Q&A section where if you want to add in any of your burning questions for the panel, you can add them into the Q&A, not into the chat, and we will have 15 minutes at the end to run through some of those. So please make use of that. That'll be really helpful. And keep being active in the chat. If you find something super useful, add a +1, just like let us know that we're doing a good job. And feel free to just add in your thoughts as we go along. Cool. So I think with that, we can get stuck in. So I'm going to come up to Michael and Frank first. So we all know that the first step to success in SaaS is customer onboarding. I might be a bit biased, but we know that's the truth. Is there a trend of doing the bare minimum and hoping for the best? And how can teams start thinking beyond just a simple checklist for onboarding and truly focus on realizing value?
Well, definitely hope is not a strategy, I think is the one word I'd say out of that. I always coach everyone, look for where that first value is that the customer is going to realize. You want to give them, you don't have to teach them every facet of your product from end to end. I have a client right now that got stuck trying to teach them users everything about the product all up front. It overwhelmed everybody. Focus on the first value. What's that first milestone, that first aha moment you need to get them to, and then figure out what are the building blocks that the user is going to need to keep wanting to come back to the product over and over again, day in, day out, to do whatever they need to do and know what they need to do to reach that value every day. Frank, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think another thing to keep in mind here is that the people that we're onboarding, they were already very busy before we added our onboarding tasks to their plate. And so if you use the word checklist, Claire, I think if we give our customers checklists or traditional project management tools, We're essentially assigning them more work, more tasks, and they're people who are already swamped with work. So that's going to make continued engagement a little bit more difficult. If instead we try to structure our onboarding and even communicate our onboarding in the language of value-based outcomes and put things in a value context, I think that helps lead to the better achievement of objectives. We should try to help our customers. They're busy. Let's try to help them accomplish more that matters to them in their day and not just pile more tasks onto their already full to-do list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key there is value, right? And not just getting through our checklist as the onboarding manager, but actually making sure that the value is the piece that we're trying to deliver each interaction that we have with them. Great points. So again, if you want to add any comments into the chat, we're keeping an eye on it. I want to bring Kat into this next topic because we have worked together and we worked in a dedicated onboarding team. And the question I want to ask to you and Frank, because I think you have slightly differing views on this, which will be interesting. And it's a debate I have so often with people. Should you have a dedicated customer onboarding team, or should the CSM be responsible for customer onboarding? So go for it. I want to hear what you guys have thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot take. So in my view, there isn't a one size fits all answer. Dedicated onboarding teams can offer the specialized focus and the streamlined process, and then that allows the CSMs to engage with customers on a higher level post onboarding. However, I think CSMs have a key role in onboarding as they are the ones who are building the long-term relationships and understanding the customer needs. So a hybrid model can work really well. Dedicated teams handle the initial stages, but then CSMs come in early to personalize the experience and just ensure a smoother handoff transition period.
Yeah, I completely agree that there's no good one-size-fits-all solution. Products are different, companies are different, levels of complexity are different. I can tell you I've tried both models. Right now here at OnRamp, I am trying to have my one team do all the roles, see customer success, onboarding, and even support. And it's got its benefits, but it's got its challenges. I think in an ideal world, right, it would be best for the customer experience if they only had to work with one person, and if that person somehow had the skills to help them throughout their entire life cycle with every issue they needed help with, right? That would be great if it was possible. But a lot of times that's not practical for a variety of reasons. It's hard to have all those skill sets sometimes, and that's why we end up specializing roles. So I think the way to go about this situation by situation is to not start with an org structure predetermined in mind or anything like that, but to think about what's going to benefit the customer the most, and to think about handoffs as a necessary evil, if you will, a last resort. Handoffs are efficient. Michael, you talked earlier about something it might have been in the pre-meeting. You were talking about what the most common cause of churn was. I've been in places where our most common cause of churn was handoffs. It was one of our biggest risk factors. And so I think if we can minimize handoffs and then make those handoffs when they're necessary as smooth and seamless as possible, and remove the redundant communications and transfers of information, and have the specialization only when it benefits the customer, not just when it benefits us internally, that's going to be when it works best.
Just to kind of play devil's advocate here, I have seen when the CSM is doing the full gambit of all of the roles, they have very little time to iterate and develop and like experiment with like an onboarding process, because sometimes onboarding just works. It's fine. It doesn't, like, it was kind of working. It's fine. We have to focus on renewals. We have to focus on expansion and the number that we're, target we've been given. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the idea that you focus either on onboarding or on renewals, I think it's time for that idea to be challenged, right? I would throw out there that if you tripled down on onboarding and got your customers to such a place of adoption and value realization during onboarding, the renewals would almost take care of themselves, give them to the billing department, right? That's an extreme point of view, but we like to say that the work we do with the customer up front matters, but then we tend to try to throw all our resources to that renewal point in the life cycle. And really, if we practice what we preach a little bit more and really double down on the onboarding, we might be surprised by the results.
Music to my ears, to be honest. And Christine in the chat is agreeing that onboarding is when renewals are most in jeopardy. It's so true. Cool. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next topic now. Bob and Michael, you're up. So I want to talk about scaling onboarding, and it's quite a hot topic. So how can companies balance the need for a scalable onboarding program and process with the need for personalized experiences? So ultimately, is true personalization achievable at scale?
Well, a part of it might be just to define better which type of personalization we're talking about, for the customer or for the individual user. I certainly believe you probably can't do both, especially right out of the gate. Most of your initial steps that you're going to take to get to scale is going to be taking maybe the view of that customer, or that customer's use case might be the thing you organize around first, to try and give them a very repeatable type of process, maybe not all the way down in the weeds, personalizing every step, but up at that 1,000-foot level, being able to give realistically a repeatable and consistent process that customers with a similar use case would go through, because then you're going to help them learn how do they take this journey with your product the right way. So,
Yeah, I
Bob,
think
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Michael. I do find that onboarding is often kind of the first place that a lot of companies, especially newer companies, look to for scale. And in my opinion, it really should be the last. So I agree with you. I think first of all, we need to define what personalization means, because it's one of these terms that people throw around very haphazardly, and nobody sat down to talk about what do we mean by personalization. So I think some of it is possible. But I tend to think of scaling in terms of three phases, right? We do it with humans, then we do it with automation and tooling, and eventually the only thing that really scales is the product. So ideally, all of this stuff is happening in the product, and depending on where you are in that continuum, kind of depends on how well you can personalize that experience as you scale, because there's going to be parts of it that are never going to scale and you're going to need humans, and there's going to be parts of it that happen in the product, and we're always trying to move things from the left to the right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed.
I wonder as well, what are the triggers that we should look out for as onboarding managers as to when we need to start thinking about making some changes?
Well, I was going to say, Bob, this is where you and I may, I don't know if disagree, but I would actually argue you need to, the trigger for me is always that first sale. And I literally mean the first customer sale. You need to start thinking about, maybe not executing on, but thinking about, how am I going to make this process repeatable? How am I going to take those learnings and bring them back so that I can go refine them? How do I almost get the process going on continuous improvement for that, so that I can improve my onboarding program enough so that at every step of the way, I'm either automating one more thing, or at least making it repeatable and reusable, and maybe even making it more proactive, right? I do believe part of our job as CS professionals is to help guide the customer along the journey. But what we're talking about here at the very start of, when do you start doing some of that? I think you start early and make sure you have a process that you can incorporate feedback to quickly change or evolve both your process and your journey as needed.
Yeah, and I don't think we disagree. I do think, just tying this back to something we were talking about before, and dedicated teams. I do think that kind of iteration and continuous improvement you talked about, Michael, is a lot easier if you've got a dedicated team, Claire, as opposed to this being 10% of a CSM's job. And Frank, you were talking about having one single, CSM do all of this. I love that too, because because the handoffs are always the first thing that break. But in terms of the triggers, I think the one thing that a lot of companies miss the opportunity to do is create different flavors of onboarding, because I think that can help drive a lot of scale even without tooling. And I think when we try to do that, we automatically link them to the customer segments. So maybe we've got small, medium, and large. The truth is the onboarding experience has nothing to do with those customer segments. So it usually has to do with, does the customer have the data that we need, or the integrations, or the people and the skills and the capacity? And maybe we create different flavors of onboarding that get us away from treating every customer as if they were completely unique. And we can get a lot of scale even from doing that.
And Bob, I'll even add to, I love the point you made there about the different flavors. Yeah, I've had success in doing it based on the skill set or maturity of the user, right? Are they an expert in, and especially I've been in the cybersecurity space so long, we often have users that are cybersecurity experts. They just need to know, give me the tool, let me go run with it, versus novices that this is their first cybersecurity job. Give me as much help as possible, or somewhere in between. You got to tailor it for your market, your user.
Of that.
Awesome. And we got some good comments backing up what you're saying in the chat, which is great. Just a reminder about the Q&A section. If anyone has any questions, to add them in there. We'll be looking at those at the end. I want to talk about a potential dirty word, which is re-onboarding. And I'm going to bring Kat in to chat with Bob about this. So I am someone that really supports re-onboarding. I think it's a very important part of the life cycle, and there's no shame in it. But I want to just ask, is onboarding a continuous adaptive journey that evolves with the customer, or is it kind of it's just done once at the beginning of the life cycle and then you move on?
Well, here's my take on it. And I stole this from one of my customers I was working with. She said, we implement technology, we onboard people. And I thought that was so insightful, because you're right, Claire, the implementation of technology typically happens once, at least that core part of the technology that gives the customer that time to value that we can build on from there. But honestly, the onboarding piece never ends. And this particular client, the reason that distinction was so important is because they sold into hospitality, like frontline workers, where people are changing jobs every 3 to 6 months. And so onboard training people once was kind of like useless, right? They needed to build that training as a core competency in the organization, because their support tickets and the adoption would fall through the floor unless they were continuously helping those users build those skills.
Kat, do you want to add?
I think onboarding should absolutely be a continuous adaptive journey. Re-onboarding is definitely not a dirty word, so I'm right there with you. The customer needs, the business goals, product usage, everything is going to evolve over time. So our support should support that. I've seen the focus in the beginning of the life cycle. It can just create more gaps. So instead, look at it like onboarding is really just the first chapter.
Awesome. We have a question related to this in the chat from Colleen. Who should own the process of re-onboarding? Should it be product manager, I'm sorry, PM after the project goes live, or CSM who's taking the client now that they are live?
From my perspective, I mean, in a perfect world, I've always, again, coming back to this example that I gave, and if you're selling into retail, hospitality, where there's a lot of high turnover, I think if your training needs to be a core competency, it could be a separate training function inside professional services eventually. It's probably not the implementation team if that's a separate team, because they're very project based. It starts here and ends here. So it probably falls on the CSM if you don't have a separate training function.
Awesome. Kat, anything extra to add before I move on?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, with the CSMs taking the key role there. I have seen it too work opposite with implementation managers, onboarding managers, taking those asks as well, using that to drive some revenue, and package it in a way. But, that can definitely be down the line in some organizations. So, without that, it helps with the structure of keeping things. Hey, this is a resource dedicated to expert, and bringing that as a resource into this partnership that, it might be growing, it might be failing, but bringing in an expert, wherever that lives in the organization, I've seen a lot of success with that.
Yeah, and just a final note on this, and I've written about this in my newsletter, that re-onboarding should never be seen as a failure. It's just an additional kind of like proactive piece of work that should happen throughout the life cycle. And I think sometimes other teams might see it as a bit of a failure that you have to re-onboard someone, but it's definitely not that. Cool. Keep the chat going. There's lots of really cool comments going in there, so appreciate that. Next one is for Michael and Bob. So I've had this experience previously, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So we know that customer onboarding is super important. We've talked about it. We've mentioned it a few times now, but it's often not given the budget or the dedication to truly impact this customer lifetime value. And I've definitely felt that before. What's some advice we could give for people to broach this topic with leadership to try and kind of move that along?
Well, to me, and the dirty secret here is I started my life in finance before I got into tech, right? So I understand a little bit of the budgeting process of where that comes from as well. You almost always need to learn how to tell that good story of here's what's happening. Here's the problem that we've identified. Here's my plan to fix that problem. And ultimately, and this is where I need your help. Specifically, this is where I need budget. This is where I need executive support. This is where I need whatever else it is. And it's, I always coach folks to say, get that story straight, identify that core problem. Matter of fact, any CSM that's worked for me usually knows I ask, what's the problem? What's your plan to fix it? And where do you need my help? It comes back to that. If you can nail that, here's the problem, here's the challenge we have. I would say tie that into how your lack of onboarding or the gaps that are there are undermining ultimately customer lifetime value, retention, growing your churn numbers, customer sat, whatever the metric you're measuring at the end is. That will help you tie that together now with data supporting the impact it's going to have to the business. And now you can come through and really make the justification for this is why we need this investment to go do X to solve this problem.
Yeah, I love that, Michael. And the other thing about that story is I think it should be simple. And as you said, it should be based on data. Because do you ever notice how sales and marketing never have a problem getting budget? And it's always customer success that seems to have to argue 10 times harder for the resources. There's a few different reasons for that, but the main one is that sales and marketing have a lot more data. They have a lot more kind of experience in telling those stories with data. One of my favorite kind of analogies, what comes from the early days of Facebook. And when Facebook was getting started, they had enough data and they wanted to figure out what was making their applications sticky, the difference between those people that signed up for an account and never came back and the people that came and stayed. And they found that threshold for stickiness was 7 friends in 10 days. And so if you came and invited 7 friends in 10 days, you were going to be a sticky user. If you took 15 days to do it, or if you only invited 5 friends, you were going to eventually tail off. And the beauty of that data and that story was how simple it was and how it helped galvanize the entire company around it's useless. It doesn't matter if we go out and sign a bunch of new customers. If people aren't inviting 7 friends in 10 days, it's a waste of time. So if you can figure out with data what your 7 friends in 10 days is and tie that back to adoption and retention and growth, you'll get all the resources you need.
Oh, great.
Totally agree, Bob. Keep it simple. And it's not even just the budget. It may also be access to others in your organization to help, right? Marketing and sales are really good at getting others to come help them on things. We need to learn lessons from them.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna go to a question that I had later on because I think we're on the topic of data. So I just want to kind of hone in on that a bit because I think it's really important and maybe an overlooked one. So how can people that are responsible for onboarding best use the data for iteration and progress specifically of their customer onboarding programs? You kind of touched on this a little bit, Bob, but I don't know if there's anything you can elaborate on with that.
Yeah, I think I mean, we were talking about time to value earlier, right? And I think that the data is really about where are people getting stuck? Like in order to understand how we're going to get people to that time to value quickly, we have to understand exactly what they're doing and when. It does come back to that 7 friends in 10 days, but not a surprise to anybody on this phone. The answer is always when we ask the customer to do something. I mean, if we were in charge of everything, we could probably do it in a quarter of the time. Every time we say, okay, we need information from you, or we need help from IT, or we need you to go and get this support from people, that's where things grind to a halt. So having data on the application and the usage, but also on just how quickly we're moving the customer through those different phases.
And Claire,
Right.
that's one of the
It's
reasons. Oh, go ahead, Kat.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say it's the bottlenecks, right? So, finding out where those bottlenecks are, and then that always comes up in time to first value, engagement levels. You can even throw in A/B testing in there to kind of figure out what actually is stopping, customers from getting the most out of the product.
It's also a reason why product ops, we used to have sales ops and rep ops in the past. Products ops has been the hottest department for the last 9 to 12 months, where companies are realizing we need good telemetry data. We need to be able to tell all the problems we just mentioned. Where is the user? Where are they in the journey? Where did they stop going through the journey in the time frame we thought of? And how do you go start to tackle that problem and unblock them?
That leads us on nicely to the next question, actually. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done across departments with onboarding. You touch every single different department, whether that's marketing, CS, product, support. It's kind of, you're right in the middle of it. So I think this is a topic where it's not always easy to know how to work with those teams. So I suppose firstly, which other departments should we focus on building a relationship with, and why? Like, why is it important?
I'll jump in here, right? To me, it's product, marketing, and finance. Product, because you really want to focus on, are there ways to build either that telemetry or simplification into the process along the way, specifically for onboarding, making it an easier journey. Marketing, because they kind of know how to move people along in that pipeline well and leverage that data, learn some lessons from them. But also marketing is looking for what comes out of the pipeline. They're looking for advocates. So get their help in building solid onboarding success stories and use cases so that they can build up advocates early. And then from finance, that's usually where I lean on them from both a dollars and reporting angle of it to show the impact of the changes we're making. Because they're focused on how my CFOs have always said, how do I stop churn early on? Onboarding's the answer. Let's figure out where we go do that. How can you help me?
Yeah, you talked about marketing and product. Those are great call outs. The obvious one, I think, is also sales. I mean, what do sales care about? They care about the velocity of their deals. So how quickly can they move deals through their pipeline? Obviously hitting their targets, etc. And so how can we get onboarding involved in the latter stages of those deals to actually reduce kind of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that can really slow down the deals in the last part of those processes? So we haven't really talked too much about the handoff between sales and onboarding. That could be a totally different webinar. But yeah, as you said, Michael, it's really all about how can onboarding help marketing, product, and sales achieve the things that they care about. And there is a lot of value that onboarding can place. It just doesn't have the visibility and the credibility in a lot of organizations, and it really needs to be elevated.
Definitely agree. And I know there's an upcoming webinar about the handoff.
No, yeah, there you go.
It's like you knew. Yeah. So that will be coming up. Cool. Well, I am now going to move over to the Q&A because we've got a few good questions in there. So feel free to add anything more in, anyone, if you want. If we have time to answer them, we will. So I'm going to just read some of these out, and whoever wants to jump in and answer, go ahead. So this is an anonymous one. What works best today based on your experience? The transition from sales to CS, including handoff types, when accounts are low touch and it is sticky for customers to see CS as their partner. Does anyone want to take that one?
Sure,
I guess.
I'll
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, so we have found that handoff is a time to either maintain momentum or lose momentum, and the post sales, the onboarding kickoff is a critical moment in the onboarding, and unfortunately, all of us have busy calendars, right? And the time between when the deal closes and the handoff happens and when the kickoff happens, boy, it's almost never right away. There's always some calendar Tetris in between there that causes momentum to be lost. And so I think what's working well for us and what I've seen in other places is the more you can use automation to shorten that time between the handoff and the kickoff, the better. And it's true, really independent of the complexity or size of the client.
Awesome. Let me find some other ones here.
Right there. The only thing I'd add, just while you're looking up the next question, is that, yeah, and just because they're tech touch doesn't mean that they don't require some sort of support in that onboarding phase. And I get it, because sometimes in tech touch, we're like, it's almost like we don't really want them to know that there's humans here, because we know that they're going to start reaching out to us when they have problems. But that's really indicative of a group of users that aren't ready for those training wheels to be taken off yet. And so it can be tech touch, but there's probably a need for some sort of additional support during onboarding. And if we take those training wheels off too soon, we're going to regret it.
Bob, I've got one for you. Someone has asked, what exactly did you mean by flavors as opposed to customer segments?
Good question. Well, I think the flavors are, so let's say, and I think Michael was talking about this, a lot of times what I encourage people to do is look at your wildly successful customers versus your ones that churned. And what you'll usually find is that success is defined, very early on, like we talked about. And what are those customers that just seem to fly through onboarding? They have the capacity, they have the executive commitment, they have the data, they have the resources. Michael was referring to some of these before. So those kinds of customers require a very different kind of onboarding experience than the ones that they're usually smaller. Everybody there is wearing different hats. Frank talked about they already had a full-time job before we showed up. They're going to need a lot more support. So it's almost like, you could profile them based on maturity. How well are they positioned to do the work that we're asking them to do, and then create like a low, medium, high experience based on that.
And Bob, what you described, I would almost call as what are you onboarding them on? The more experienced user really just needs to know how to use your product. They know how to do that day job. Your product makes it go faster. For the others, you're really exploring, how do I teach them how to do the job, maybe what that function is in the industry. And, oh, by the way, here's new software to learn how to do it too. So you have to judge the different tracks. I think it's really the different subject courses you're going to need to teach them on.
Yeah, I like that. Just maybe it's even different flavors of change management as much as it is about onboarding.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Nice, I like that. This one's an interesting one. How do you best manage onboarding when the customer wants you to train 1 to 2 super users, and then the super users take responsibility for handling internal training for a larger customer base team through like continuous onboarding? And it can be challenging to understand how the client is translating your onboarding process and program to make sure it's effective. So how do you manage that situation?
That sounds like a new revenue stream for upsells, right? I think of it more almost like if you have partners or channel partners that you're working with within your space, your job is to train them to be successful. In this case, you're looking to train the client, or the customer's internal training staff in how to replicate this training going on. So I almost think it's a completely different type of delivery you're doing, not so much training them as users, but co-branding or co-building a training program that they're going to ideally embed into their normal people onboarding process, which would make you incredibly sticky. So I think this would be a great opportunity, but you have to think of it more of I'm a learning manager building a curriculum versus I'm doing just a training onboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Kat, this is probably one relevant for you, I reckon. How do you hold the customer accountable for information needed to start onboarding?
Yep, love that. Very applicable in the day to day. Absolutely. I think the biggest hurdle to overcome there is getting them comfortable with the platform. Um, Letting the reins off early, let them get in there, you know, mess up a little bit so that you can guide them back on track. Um, you know, Customers tend to have a million things on their plates. And so we don't want to add to that per se, but being there to hold their hand through it, letting them know it's okay if this isn't done ahead of time. We'll do it together. I think that's the biggest way to mitigate that head on.
Absolutely. I have another question here that might also be relevant to you. What is the best way to define the close of an onboarding project? When does onboarding complete?
Yeah, I think we let the customer tell us. Surveying our customers, getting CSAT scores. That way they can tell us if they're ready or not. I think having onboarding a start and an end date, 45 days, isn't best practice in my opinion. I think we talk about flavor of customer, training power users, things like that. It can vary. And so once a customer is feeling confident, we're seeing usage on our end, that box is checked. Once they feel confident, then that's when we can confidently say, hey, you can take this on, and move forward and expand on the product from there.
And I'd add, Kat, that we shouldn't be shy about kind of educating or guiding the customer as to what that good first milestone looks like. They may have it in their head, but I always find if you can nudge them closer to what they're really going to need to be successful, that's the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The only thing I'd add, I love what you just said there, Kat. I do think if we think of onboarding as we're in the business of making our users confident enough that they can use this in their daily lives without us, that really changes it, because confidence is at the heart of what we're doing. And if people don't really believe they can do this on their own, it's just going to be much easier to go back to the way they've always done things.
Great.
And that was actually something when we worked together, Kat, that we implemented, was like a confidence level score that came alongside the survey for CSAT and other metrics. And at the very least, it got customers thinking about actually how confident they were in using the product. And it also highlighted any red flags early on for us in order to kind of tackle any potential problems where, maybe from a first glance, you'd think they know what they're doing, but in reality, they were struggling. Some more questions. Okay, we've got a few more minutes, so I'm going to try and get through some more. What do you think is the ideal time for the initial training session? After a few weeks of usability testing or before the client starts using the product? So you laugh, Michael.
I was going to say it's completely depends on the intuitiveness of your product, right? And again, if you think back to the prior answer I gave of, are you teaching just how to use the product or how to use the product and best practices in this world and new trends or risks that are coming up for people in your position? If you're training a much larger scope, you want to start earlier. If you're going to implement with experts, it's here's the product, here's what training is available to you. And then you could always tailor your onboarding when you see resistance to the customer getting to the right milestones in the product. You can always redirect them back to training. But it really depends on how well your product is suited for someone to take it and run with it.
I agree. It depends a lot on the product. That's a good point. I think though that at the end of the day, most of us are in the product business, not in the professional services business, right? And so our product is either our best CSM or our worst CSM. But in either case, I think the sooner we can reasonably get our customers using the product, that's the thing they bought. That's the thing that will deliver them value. Every day that we have a good reason to delay getting a person to be trained and use the product, that's a problem we should be trying to solve, right? Ideally, you buy the product, you use it right away. We should take some lessons in the B2B world from the B2C folks. You download an app on your phone, you use it immediately. You don't wait 5 days. And if we could get closer to that, that would be better.
Yeah, I think I actually would challenge that. It's not about product, it's about the customer's live date and when they want to launch. We go through onboardings and maybe customers aren't ready. So I see a gap or maybe a mistake being made about running through trainings with examples, not live and not the real data or live examples that they are actually building or making in the product. So I think it depends when the customer wants to be live. That way we can use onboarding not just to run through like a default training, but to really make it customized to that actual program or whatever they are launching. So that could be tomorrow or that could be in a few months.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for one more quick question before time runs out. And this one I think is interesting. How do you account for capacity for onboarding teams if there aren't concrete dates? But in general, how do you account for capacity for onboarding teams? Anyone want to quickly answer that one?
I time box it, right? You break the onboarding effort's going to be an X number of discrete units. And I know on my team, I've got capacity for 20 onboardings this week. Great. Who are those 20 going to be? How do we line them up? How do you align the sales funnel to what those are?
That was perfectly concise. Thank you, Michael.
We had a
Cool.
clock.
We are at time. So I just want to say thank you very much to all of the panelists that have joined us today. And thank you to everyone attending, sticking around, interacting. That was really cool to see. So thank you. Oh, some cool comments as well. Thank you, guys. So just let's keep the conversation going. So in the next 24 hours, OnRamp is going to send out a follow-up email, and it's going to have the recording and some key takeaways. So make sure you keep an eye on that. And then also, OnRamp will love to have you back for the next fireside chat, which we already mentioned. I think there was a link, but the link will be in the chat. It's on the March 20th, and it is all about sales to CS handoff, which we did mention. So make sure you sign up for that. The link is in the chat. And if today's conversation got you thinking about how your team can better invest in onboarding, OnRamp would love to chat. So schedule some time with the OnRamp team to see the platform in action and talk through your onboarding challenges. You can grab the demo link also in the chat. Perfect timing, Melissa. And if you need easy to implement ideas to improve your customer onboarding program, you will get my newsletter, the Onboarding Lab, every Thursday for free to your inbox. So you can reach out to me if you want to talk about anything more specific. But with that, that is it for today. Thank you again, everyone, and we will see you next time.